We now welcome business and acquisition strategist and managing partner from the Tenney Group, Mr. Spencer Tenney.
Bound down, loaded up and trucking. Are we gonna do what they say can't be done? We've got a long way to go, and a short time to get there.
Who of you in this grand ballroom would consider yourself to be a genius? Mark Rawling? Thank you for raising your hand, sir. Your humility is an inspiration for all of us. Thank you, Mark. Now, if you're looking for a genius from me today, I'm sorry to disappoint. I'm certainly not that, but I do bring some unique perspective. My family, for those of you who are not familiar with Tenney Group, we've been advising on business sales and acquisitions in the transportation and logistics space. Next year will be 50 years. Personally, I've been at the table transacting with the very best of the best acquirers in transportation and logistics for the last 20 years. And you know what I've observed during that time? Those folks that are doing all the winning, they're not geniuses either. They're not really that original in their approach, not particularly innovative, and definitely not complex. It's a lot like Mr. Rowling was telling us. They do the right things at the right time all the time. And that's what we're talking about today with 9 differentiators that separate acquisition winners and losers. And so why now? Why would we be talking about this topic right now at this summit? Last year was a record year for M&A and transportation logistics. This year, we believe it's going to surpass that in terms of actual deal volume and activity. So the truth is this: you're going to hear about all of the drivers that are affecting. You're already hearing those things that are actually influencing why deals get done. The facts are these: whether or not you want to build a dynamic, compelling business over the next 3 to 5 years or further on, or you just want to hold on to what you've got because of all of the rising expenses and challenges that we're facing, it's very likely that you're going to need to integrate in some way acquisitions as part of your strategy. You want to hear the good news? This is a very learnable skill and something that you can get good at very fast. Differentiator number 1, count the cost before you build. One of my dear industry friends, his name's John, came up to me not that long ago and he said, "Spencer, I've thought about this a lot. I'm at 400 trucks right now. I want to go to 700 trucks in 4 years. You're my guy. Let's go do some deals. Giddy up. Let's get this thing handled." And I said, "John, I love the enthusiasm. This is wonderful. This is great. May I ask you a question?" He said, "Well, sure. How is having 700 trucks going to make your life better?" And he paused. He said, "I never really thought about it like that. I just love trucks." And so we laughed for a moment, and he sat there and he said, "I'll be right back." And he goes back into the office, and John is a very religious man, great man of faith. And he comes back and he's got his Bible and he says, and he reads this to me. He says, listen to this. And he's talking about Jesus talking to people that wanted to follow him and be his disciples. And Jesus says, "Who of you that wants to build a tower does not first sit and calculate the cost to ensure that you have enough to complete it?" And that was when I knew that John understood what we were trying to do and understood how people that are highly successful at deals create a foundation for success. They count the cost before they build. So what does that look like? They quantify the cost of action and inaction. Well, John had already been feeling the pain of all the different things. He's very much attuned to what not doing deals was costing him, but hadn't spent much time about what it actually looks like. First-time acquirer, what it was going to be required of him, and from a lifestyle standpoint, from taking on new debt. So part of the foundation is going through this sequence. You got to account for these things. Specifically, we need to find out what the value of tower number 1 is before we go build or acquire tower number 2. Y'all with me? So we started there, did an assessment on his business, and then also we want to take inventory on funding resources. A lot of people don't understand how many capital resources they have at their disposal immediately. So we just kind of went through an exercise: cash, seller financing, do some stock, we could do equipment financing. There's a whole host of different things But we itemize those things out in terms of what are the tools in the toolkit, then we get to work. And through that, we're able to refine goals and also refine his why. Now, John, his whole deal was, I want to build this because he was super passionate about a ministry within his community. He said, I could profoundly impact the whole trajectory of this ministry if I build what I think I can build. So that was his why. And so once we got that, we got some timelines, but the main thing was that we were able to have some structure to activate his senior leadership team so they could actually do the work. Differentiator number 2, now that we've got a foundation, the best thing that we can do is to recognize it's not realistic for us to go create a significant volume of acquisition opportunities alone. We need help. And so the people that do this the best are extremely effective in mobilizing the people that have an aligned interest with their success. So what does that mean? Identify advocates with aligned interests. Cottingham Butler is a huge example of this. Your insurance solution providers, your attorneys, your CPAs, the people that win when you win, these are the people that you want looped into what you're trying to accomplish and why. And if you can share your goals and the pain points that you're trying to solve for, they can help you. They can help you accelerate this whole thing because they know people. They know how to solve problems. And so the degree that you can get that, you basically have a free sales force developed immediately. So that's what winners do. Now, the other part of that is they equip this sphere of influence with very specific messaging. Now, let me tell you what not to do here. I had a guy that came to me, happened to be an insurance guy, was not Cottingham and Butler, to be clear. And he says, hey, Spencer, man, I'm so excited. I just got off the phone with one of my clients. He's raring to go. He wants to do acquisitions. Man, he wants to do everything. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to be on the cheap. So, bring those types of people to us. And I was like, immediately, I called Davis Looney. Davis is in here somewhere. I said, Davis, call all hands on deck. Let's get all of our clients, and let's get this guy in front of everybody. Y'all think that's what actually happened? No, that's not what happened. There's no alignment there. Now, I understand what he's trying to do. We understand that he is trying to be economical, but had a business owner been a little bit more targeted about how they wanted to equip with that message, it might have looked like this. Hey, Spencer, I've got a wonderful client. I'm so excited about their growth strategy. If you have some people that like an owner that really is sensitive about having a wonderful next home from a buyer, this guy's awesome. The culture's great. There's all kinds of opportunities for career advancement. Now, he's probably not going to be the most aggressive on price, but let me tell you where he's going to be awesome, and your people are going to love him. He can close in 60 days, and they'll make this extremely seamless and straightforward for the seller. Now did y'all see the difference? That I can work with. If you can equip the people that want to advocate for you with a message like that, that can engage people. That's something that, hey, I can go set aside next to an offer with one of my clients and say, hey, there's merit. It's not the most money, but there's some things that I know that you care about. So these are some things that we can consider. And lastly, just be grateful. If you want these people to help bring you and attract opportunities, just make sure when they do, you say thank you. Send a thank you note. Send them flowers. Whatever you want to do, but just acknowledge it so that you can keep that system running the way that it's supposed to. Differentiator number 3, establish point person in deal screening process. Now, very common for an owner or one of your top 3 people to be leading this process. I'm going to go at the risk of having an issue with some of you. I've met some of you doing these deals, and your number 1 lead person is possibly not as charming as you think they are. So you might want to back up a little bit, because here's what happens. When you think about it from the seller's perspective, what is this? It's the single largest financial transaction of a lifetime. And I assure you, it's not just about the money. It matters who they transact with. And so when you recognize that, and believe me, the winners of acquisition work, they are very attuned to this, and they lead with their person that is the most relational, that has the ability to create rapport and trust, and they play the long game. And that's what winners do. If you get in here somebody who just says, hey, let's do a deal, and it feels over transactional, you might not even get somebody engaged. So the best select a thoughtful point person to lead this. And the next thing that they do is that they prevent a process, a very professional process with a timeline. So what this looks like, have you ever heard a story like this where somebody says, man, a buyer came to me and we had a great conversation. He asked for all this information. And I don't know what I did. Maybe I said something, but I have not heard from that guy like in 3 months. I have no idea if he's interested. I have no idea if I did something wrong. But I tell you one thing, I feel very compromised that he has my information right now. Has anybody ever heard a story like that? I've heard many of them. So in contrast, in terms of what separates winners in that same moment, doing something very simple, when they express interest, they lay it all out on the table. What's this process going to look like? What information are you going to ask for? How are we going to take this step by step? When are you going to tell me that you're not interested? When are you going to tell me that you are interested? When you have the right person who's just saying some simple things, what you're doing is you're creating trust, and you're guiding them through this process in a way where they feel comfortable, and you're preemptively addressing some things that they have understandable sensitivity about, specifically confidentiality and just inexperience. In the vast majority of situations, the buyer in the transaction has 10 times more experience than the seller does have selling. So that type of approach goes a long way. The other part is identifying showstoppers. I had a carrier come to me not that long ago and said, man, we were tied up in a 6-month conversation only to find out this guy told us the reason he was passing is because he didn't want to haul paper. I said, what in the world? What in the world? That took 6 months? He could find that out in literally 2 seconds. If he knew that was going to be a showstopper, you don't need financials, you don't need anything. The best find that out, they understand what their showstoppers are, and think about what that does from a reputation standpoint. If you start getting a reputation that, hey, it didn't work out for us, but I like the way they do business. They didn't give me the runaround, they gave me a fast no. You might be a fit for them. Maybe you should go talk to them. See the difference? All right, differentiator number 4, show restraint. One of the greatest challenges for buyers trying to do deals is to not ask for everything. Give me it all. I want to see everything. Give me all the financials from 5 years, whatever the deal is. Give me the raw data. No. There is a sequencing of this that allows the best buyers to understand. And I'll give you an example. We had a deal that a buyer had a really traumatic issue on a transaction prior to getting Tenney Group involved where there was a breach of confidentiality. They thought maybe they never could sell again, just couldn't endure the stress of that. Ultimately, they hire us. We know that there's major accommodations that we're making to our process to help them get through this. And so what happens is we take what would be a much larger list. It's a very strong company. And we get it narrowed down to about 20 people that we think, number one, could be a fit. And 2, satisfy the financial outcome that our client needs. So our client looks at that and takes 5 seconds and takes 14 off that list. Can't talk to him. I was like, I think we can control that. Doesn't matter. Not going to be part of the deal. So we started having conversations with the remaining 6, and they started asking for some basic information that was very customary, wasn't excessive at all, really, just trying to get a sense of how a deal could get done and why. And when those buyers, who were educated buyers, decided to bow out, one stayed in the conversation. One. And the result of that was they just kind of made a bet and said, I think that we can play the long game here, work the relationship, go at a pace that the seller's comfortable with, and eventually we're going to get the information. We're just going to go much slower than what we'd like to go. So that's what they did. They leaned in, and fast forward, they're getting a deal done. This is a nine-figure deal. And probably to our estimation, and our client knows this, been very transparent in terms of the risk that they're taking in terms of leaving money on the table. But because the buyer showed restraint, played long game, he's probably getting the deal for about $14 million less than what we think if they had allowed other people to stay in the process. So, that's big money. In terms of a discipline, this is why winners win. They show some restraint. Obviously, you're never going to do a deal until you're 1,000% satisfied with the information that's provided, but you don't need that day one. And if you can show that restraint, you can win big. All right, Differentiator number 5, make written offers fast and often. Now this, I'm gonna need a little help from my first and one of my favorite M&A philosophers, Ricky Bobby, which is, if you ain't first, you're last. And I say this all the time, and there's a lot of people that are doing thoughtful diligence, and don't hear this the wrong way. Some people, you need to do the diligence just to understand it. That's completely legitimate. But there's a lot of folks that get the sequencing out of order. In order to be competitive, there kind of needs to be a basic investment thesis for you to kind of engage and kind of get to that next level of the conversation. And just this happened very recently. We had a deal, mid-size operation, maybe 50 million, and there's about 6 people that have already signaled that probably in the next 30 to 40 days, once we do our search on this, we expect to make an offer. So this is getting a lot of traction. One of those buyers in 6 days was able to submit what we call a very informal, non-binding document called an indication of interest. And what this document does, we use this all the time or provide it to buyers that want it. It's basically just a template that hits the high points of what most sellers care about most. What are they trying to figure out? Are we even in the same universe when it comes to probably the most important thing, which is the money, right? That's what they're trying to do. So in this situation, it wasn't even an exact price. It was a range of offers. It hinted at some possible deal structures that thought would make available. And they also hit something that was a sensitivity. They kind of crafted what they thought might be a possible role for the owner. And then they provided very specific process about, if we agreed on this right now, this is what it would look like if we closed, and it would be 60 days. And this is what we would need. And this is the advisors that we would probably use as part of that. And so our client comes to us, and we're saying, hey, man, this is great. We got great traction. We're going to have another 5 offers comes in. And he goes, hey, you know what? And he's like, I'm old school. When I know, I know. I like the way these people do business. So I'm just going to ask, can you just press pause? I want all of my attention to see if I can just get a deal done with this guy. Because I like the way he does business. The money feels like it's competitive. And that's what we did. So think about what using Ricky Bobby's template in terms of being first. Think about what that created for them. He boxed out the entire competition. I don't know what he saved. I don't think it was. I think that probably the offers were going to be pretty close. But certainly, if he wanted to squeeze out more money, he could have. But because this buyer focused on speed and certainty of close, hear that. A path that was certain about closing, outlining those next steps, took all the competition out of the game. And that's what winners do. All right. If you're interested in this slide deck, this is just a very simple example. This is not rocket science, people. But this is just a template. If you want that, we're happy to provide that. Differentiator number 6, ensure first management team meeting is a wow. So many of you have been a part of deals, and sometimes this can happen in advance of an LOI, or even earlier. But the intent is for the buyer to kind of get a sense, like, hey, we're trying to firm up. We know there's some initial interest, but we're trying to firm up what are the capabilities of the current operational team? How might that affect value? What does that mean in terms of potential risk as part of transferring ownership? So these meetings can have significant influence on what happens afterwards. And so to give you an example of that, the best buyers understand that this can be pivotal, and they always make sure that they execute at this particular function. They start by creating a clear agenda. Everyone knows who's going to be there. Everyone knows what we're going to talk about. And even more importantly, we know what we're not going to talk about. The last thing that an owner wants is their management team being in a meeting with a prospective buyer and not knowing what they're going to talk about. It's a horrible situation. So that's what the best do. They set that up. And the next thing they do, they are very intentional about developing the relationship. And they'll typically, before they get into any of the ops, they'll start developing the relationship. And in a recent meeting that I was a part of, you want to talk about ice cold. We had nervous Nelly clients. They didn't know what the heck was going on. We coached them up, but man, they were nervous, and visibly nervous, like it was uncomfortable for everybody to watch. And it was just like clockwork. The buyer recognized it as well. And he said, you know what, why don't we just kind of step back? Let's just get to know one another. And he'd started an exercise he called a good news report, went around, shared best thing that's happened in the last 2 weeks. And so, one of the buyers shares, well, hey, this weekend it's top of mind. I just got back from a ski trip with my son. It's a father-son tradition. We do it. We've been doing it the last 5 years. It's probably the best. It's the highlight of my year. And immediately, a member on the seller's management team leans in and goes, ma'am, I've been doing that with my son. We go fishing. We've been doing that 15 years, and I agree. The best. The energy in the meeting immediately changed. Everybody softened up. They leaned in a little bit. We got down to business, but the tenor dramatically changed. And you know what started happening? The buyer started creating allies within that operational team who would advocate to get the deal done. That was key, and that's always a key. And then finally, they left with a clear action plan. You don't leave that meeting with anybody wondering about what's next. Hey, this is the remaining list of questions that we need to address. This is who's going to round them up, when, and if there's any other questions about our intent, we will address them by this date. When you do that, a lot of good things happen. All right, differentiator number 7, remember what they will remember. Anybody who's been a part of a transaction that was particularly challenging remembers one thing. Anybody want to guess what that is? Do they remember the first encounter with the buyer, how sweet and fuzzy it was? No. They only remember the grueling process of due diligence and all the things that they had to do as a condition to get it closed. Thousands of documents, getting 100 questions answered 15 different ways, which, to be clear for you future sellers in the business, the buyer has every right to do whatever they need to do to get satisfied, both themselves, their capital providers, their lenders, whoever else, underwriters. That's just a necessary part. Now, what they don't have the right to do, and what the very best buyers never allow to happen, is that they make sure that their team is not the one slowing the thing down or creating unnecessary frustration for the seller. And you know why? Because they don't see this as a condition to closing or just as a condition to closing. They see this as a moment where they're not only going to get a deal, but they're going to get a lifetime ambassador out of the seller. Share an example here. We did a deal with one buyer a couple years ago that came right behind a very, very similar deal, but both about $100 million in sales. The first deal that we were not a part of involved a seller where the due diligence, not just the deal, just the due diligence lasted 11 months. I can't even believe it got done. I still don't know how that happened. The following year, again, we did a deal with our client, and to be fair, our client was just an animal. Their documentation was as pristine as I've ever seen. The whole due diligence took 60 days. Now, do you think that the client that had the 60-day due diligence experience is going to think differently in the way that they remember that buyer, that experience, and potentially, if they're asked about that experience, are they going to communicate it to industry peers about it a little bit differently than the person that had the 11-month due diligence? It's key. And so that's why we're saying, so like the best buyers, they charge their people saying, hey, we're not just, of course, we're trying to demonstrate good stewardship. That's only part of it. Your job is to make sure that we don't have any blind spots to get the deal done, but we're also using this last 60 to 90 days to ensure that we have a lifetime ambassador who will ultimately affect new deal flow and be a part of that opportunity pipeline moving forward. And part of that is setting just exceptionally high standards in the data room. There's never a situation where the seller has supplied what's been asked, and because of laziness or sloppiness, the buyer's asking for that again. And that happens a lot, y'all. Don't be that buyer. That happens a lot. And the other part of it is if you can imagine, if, let's say 2 years from down the road, and this is how the best buyers think about it. If I'm that buyer, I want to be in a meeting and I'm trying to get a deal done, and that same seller has 5 different offers, and they're trying to make a decision, and I just volunteer, hey, if it would be helpful to you, would you like to talk to some of the past people that we've done deals with, some of the sellers, and just ask them what was their experience during due diligence? Did we do what we said we were going to do? Did we deliver post-transaction? Think how powerful that is as far as you making that closing argument to get chosen over those other 5 candidates that the seller might be thinking to hitch in their wagon to. It's powerful. So that's why you want to make sure you at least have the option, and that's what winners do. All right, We're seeing a theme here. This is not joint messaging with Cottingham. This is a guiding principle that's on our wall at Tenney Group. Right information, right party, right time. Now, one of the greatest points of sensitivity for sellers is when and how do I tell my employees that I'm selling the business? Right? It's a big deal. And so what we found outside of senior leadership, it's almost never a good idea to tell anyone that doesn't have to be in those operational management team type meetings for them to know anything. Even when you have good intentions, there's very few things that can happen that can help the deal or help that person. They can actually hurt themselves by having access to that information. So one of the things that we've seen buyers do, even just recently, we did a deal in Alabama, and it was beautiful. And so what happens is there's a couple characteristics of how they make this announcement. Number one, they do it jointly so that there's no question about the unity between buyer and seller in the future of the business. And so they make the announcement, and they talk about the intent. What are we trying to do here? What was the seller thinking about as part of choosing this buyer, and what does it mean for the employees? And then he can pass it over to the buyer, and he can say, guess what? This buyer, I'm so excited for what this means for your careers and for your futures. They're going to be able to provide you things that I just can't do anymore based on my season of life. I don't have the ability to offer, to be able to take on new risks, to do those certain things. And then the buyer would go on to say, it's like, hey, listen, I'm very excited. I'm anxious to learn, so some humility. And then it'd also talk about how your lives are going to get better, be it benefits, access to career opportunities, training, whatever it might be, as long as obviously it's got to be true. And then the last thing that they do in terms of this right information, right party, right time is that they communicate that there's going to be space, recognizing that we don't expect you to be satisfied with what we're telling you right now completely, but like in the coming weeks, there's going to be time and space for everyone to speak their mind and have questions about how this is going to affect them. And when those things are done, using that principle of right information, right party, right time, high probability of a smooth transition. And so, again, buyers don't take any chances. They don't have any messaging that's not joint. And they make sure they hit the points that the employees care about most, which is, how does it affect me? That's all I got to know. How does it affect me and my family? You address those on the front end, you'll be in good shape. All right, we're almost home, folks. My second great M&A philosopher, Tim McGraw. Now, this is mid-90s Tim McGraw, not yoked up, shirtless Tim McGraw today. Always be humble and kind. And where I see this happening the most, we have a relationship with a buyer. We've never represented them, but there's been such good continuity in that relationship that over the last probably 15 years, we've done at least 12 deals with them. And the relationship looks like this. I mean, they know how to do deals. They don't need me for that. But whenever we reach a stalemate, he always says something like this. He says, Spencer, listen, I don't get it. I don't get the strategic rationale. I don't get the investment thesis. I certainly don't get what the seller's asking for or why. But if you can show me how I can make money here, I'll consider it. And that's it. That simple posture of humility has led to, like I said, to over a dozen deals with us, and I don't even know how many deals that he's done outside of us. A ton. And so I think that posture is such a huge value add for buyers to incorporate. Regardless of how much experience you have, humility attracts opportunity, and that's what winners do. And then lastly, be kind. This seems like a small thing, but if you think about it in terms of not just a 1 month or even a 12-month relationship, but if you think about this over the long haul of 5 to 10 years, and you think about just the cumulative effect of all of these exchanges with prospective folks that you're creating relationships, almost none of them are going to be a fit to transact today. Tomorrow might be a different story. And so what I see the very best buyers doing as a very simple practice, but they never miss this, which is like, hey, it doesn't appear that we are in alignment today in terms of goals, but I am really enjoying the relationship that we're forming here. And if it's all right with you, if anything changes on my end or perhaps with your business, could we revisit this maybe down the road and just see? I've never had a seller not respond in a way that was highly favorable to that type of communication. And so as a result of that, think about that. If you're having hundreds of conversations like that over the course of a year and you multiply that over a decade, that is a huge harvest that will ultimately benefit the buyer. And so I think it's just a small thing, but I think about it this way, because what ends up happening is they don't go back when something changes and I'm going to call 6 buyers. They go call the guy that made them feel respected, that was courteous, and that asked for it. And that's it. You remember my buddy John? John had big plans. John also had a very big why. If you remember talking about his ministry, what I found doing this for a long time, we can have all the facts. We can have all the playbooks from the very best of the best of the best. Still, it's very challenging to execute. Very challenging to execute. I've also learned that if you combine those best practices with a vision that inspires you, that challenges you, and then most importantly, affects people beyond yourself. Now that's when a little magic can happen. And I think that's where a little genius was coming from John. So my encouragement is this. Y'all, this is not that hard. You can do this, and I can't wait to see what you do. And if you do intend to go combine something at a big picture, I'm rooting for you. Go do big things. Thanks for listening.